Welcome back, everybody, to the Captain's Council for session number 4. I'm excited to talk to you all today about competitive advantages within your program. So as usual, I'd like for you all to start by pausing and reflecting on how the team is doing up to this point. In particular, I'd like for you to think about how many crucial conversations you've had and how they have gone so far this season. And then the second is to go around the room and speak to what you respect most about the person sitting to your left. Once that has been completed, I'd like for you all to do a review of session 3 and think about or try to remember, what is culture? Why is it important? What are your team's values? And then what was Bruce Tuckman's theory of group development? And so what I'd like to do now is discuss the process, what that means and why it is so important to our success. And so the process is defined as a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. And it is also a focus on the present moment and the things that you can control. This is a big buzzword that has been going around for quite some time now, and it's important that we understand what it is so that we can accurately and effectively put this into motion, and this idea of focusing on the process. And one of the things that I like to talk about are called the 3 P's of winning. And one of the things that is important for us to remember is that our character drives our process, right? And so when our character drives our process, that ultimately puts us into a particular position. And that position matters because it gives us some sort of a probability that weighs on the results that we receive. Because ultimately there are things that are within our control and things that are not within our control. And what we want to focus on is who we are, our character, and the things that we do consistently, which is the process, because those things are the only things that we can control. And ultimately, if we have a process that is better than everybody else's, over time, there will be this compounding effect, and that will give us a higher probability that we will get the outcome that we are looking for. And so at this time, I'd like you to actually pause and go through this exercise quickly, which is to think about the last time that you felt pressure or stress in any situation at all. And then write that down, and then think about why you felt that way. What was the root cause as to why you had this overwhelming emotion of stress or anxiety? And I'll give you an example. A sports one in particular would be if I'm a shortstop and it's bottom of the 9th, bases loaded, and I start getting really anxious as the ball I see is getting hit to me for a ground ball. Usually that anxiety, in almost every case, that anxiety is coming from you thinking about the future. You're thinking about what will happen if I miss. And your mind starts to visualize that process, the people that you would let down, and that anxiety builds up in you. And so I'd love for you all to think about that, write it down, and talk about it, talk about each of your responses. And once you're finished, we can continue to move forward here. And I gave you an example of that shortstop and how what he was focused on was something that was really outside of his control. The future is not anything that we'll get to. It's only always the present moment. The present moment is the only thing in which you can control. So when you're that shortstop, the worst thing you can do is think about how you missed a ball in the first inning, or what will happen if you were to miss this game-winning ground ball, essentially. The only thing you should be focusing on are the things that you can control. It's having the mental cues you need to perform at the level that you're capable of doing, and just having that right mental approach. And most of the time, the things that we worry about when we get anxious or stressed out are things that happen in the past or things that happen in the future. So we want to try to be where your feet are at. And so we needed to talk about the process if we're going to talk about what competitive advantages are, because the process is a massive component of this, this advantage. And so to discuss what a competitive advantage is, it's this circumstance that puts us in a favorable strategic position. And again, there's that word position. Positioning is everything because we want to optimize the probability for winning. A quick story is that Nebraska football team, I believe in 1969, early 1970s, they won their first national championship and ended up winning 2 out of the 3 over a 4 or 5 year period, I think. And one of the reasons that occurred is because prior to that, the coach asked, or really thought differently about their approach, I should say, and became the first program to develop a strength and conditioning program. And what he said was, hey, it might make sense if my athletes are bigger, faster, stronger. And so he, at that point in time, took a leap of faith, so to speak, in his own logic. It was not something anybody else had done previously because they felt, or the logic at that point in time was that extra weight would make you slower. And obviously now we look around today and every program has some sort of a strength and conditioning aspect to it. I think of Florida State, who does a lot of data collection and how far nutrition has come and sports psychology. There's the movie called Moneyball, where they really leverage big data and statistics to select the perfect team, so to speak. And so there's a lot to be said about what can happen and the results we can get when we think differently about our approach. And ultimately, all of these things are advantages until they become requirements, which is an interesting thought. At this point in time, if you don't have a strength and conditioning program, or then you are not, you're falling behind essentially. And so at this point in time, in today's age, it's a requirement. And so we want to think differently about what are the new advantages that we can spend our time and resources on, and skills and development for some new skills to give us an advantage. And I think there are a cool model that I put together there are 3 ways in which we can create an advantage. That is, either we can put more time and effort into what is already a requirement, so to speak. The second is to be innovative and think differently about what new advantages might be. Or we can take the requirements that are standard in today's day and age and figure out ways in which we can make them more efficient. And another story that I really like is this story of the British cycling team that's in the book called Atomic Habits. And to quickly summarize, there was an individual, I think in 2003, a new performance director that came into the program. And up until that point, the British cycling program was abysmal and had never done anything of value or relevance to the biking competitive sphere. And what he did was he took one approach and he said, in what way can I make every single thing that we do 1% better? And what he called this was an aggregation of marginal gains. And so he looked at everything that they were doing, from the type of spokes that were being used within the bikes, to the way that they were, the type of cushioning that were on the seats, to the type of pillows that the athletes were using when they were sleeping at night, to the color of the paint that was used in the transportation of the vehicles to be able to see if dust had accumulated or not. Really interesting thing. And within 5 years, they became the #1 program in the nation and in the world, and went on to do, from 2007 to 2017, I think, winning more than 150 championships, winning the most gold medals ever. So really some amazing things. And he did that with this idea of being 1% better than their opponents. And if you think about it, you do the math, if you get 1% better every single day, at the end of the year, you will be 37 times better than you were when you started. And so I'd like for you all, after I explain this, to pause and go through this exercise and process as well. And this is something that I think is very valuable to teams to think about, how they can get 1% better than their opponent. When we remember that our process is the things that we can control, other teams also have a process. And what we should really think about is comparing what they're doing to what we are doing. And I know a lot of teams want to think, well, it's not, we want to focus on ourselves and we want to be the best team that we can be. But I think and I can appreciate that sentiment. I think it's still, it makes sense for you to go through this process, and it's valuable to at least think through what other people are doing to try to develop an advantage in a competitive sphere that we're in. We are competing, and it's important to have information about our opponents. And so if you were to be on a piece of paper, start on the right side and think about and write down all the things that your opponents do that you know of. For instance, let's say it's a football program, or a baseball program. Let's say that we know that they work out 4 times a week in the mornings, that they do 50% of their individuals have private hitting lessons and fielding lessons, that the team itself practices for 2 hours per day, that 5 or 6 of them stay after practice and take extra ground balls. They do their homework if you're at the high school or college level. All of these are a part of your opponent's process. And so then you want to put these up, on the right side, like I mentioned, and then look at what you're doing and match, what they are doing. Say, okay, let's look at workouts. How many workouts are we doing currently? If it's 4, what can we do to gain an advantage on our opponent? Do we change up the way we're doing our strength and conditioning by the types of things that we're doing, or the types of exercises, or the length of time that we do? How can we make it more efficient? Or do we think differently altogether about how we approach our workouts? If the team is practicing every 2 hours for our opponent, what can we do on our end? Should we do it for 3 hours? What are their practices consist of? And then match that to what we're doing. Can we incorporate some different advantages with every single one of the drills that we have? And ultimately, you should have some strategic approach, and I call this the process war, that defines what your process is, how it's different, and ultimately where you're gaining an advantage over your opponent. And if you do that, I think over time, it's this idea of compounding effect for your program that you're looking for. And so next here we have this concept that says that winning is a choice. And I really think that this is appropriate in the sense that we choose what our process is. And for the app that we have, one of the app's functionalities is this will to win radar or meter that actually accounts for all of the actions you've taken, that you've selected, that you've completed. And what this really says is, like, when I ask who wants to win, everybody always raises their hand when I'm in a seminar or speaking to different teams. Everybody wants to win, but only a few individuals do take the behaviors and have the process that is required to win. And I'll read this quote. It says that winning is not a sometime thing. It is an all-time thing. You don't do things right once in a while. You do them right all the time. And again, I just think that this aspect of realizing that you have ownership of who you are and the things that you do, and ultimately those things drive to some sort of outcome that luck will sometimes play a factor in, but ultimately you can do the best that you can possibly do to put yourself in the best position to be successful. I always think about, that the body was made to adapt is one of my favorite quotes. And ultimately, I think if you put the time and effort in and you choose to do that, your body adapts to what it is you're putting onto it for your improvement. I've already talked about, how winning is about positioning. And we've mentioned quite a few times now how character, who we are, You don't just win every once in a while, you are a winner. And the type of people that we are seems to be reflected into the world many times. And that is shown in the process and the results that we get. And so this is the last slide. I hope that that you all took some good things out of this, in particular, the idea that, your process matters, and that you really need to think strategically about, what are the things you're doing and how are you gaining momentum and an advantage over your opponents. And again, we've talked about how you as a team captain are a massive part of this competitive advantage, and you going through this process ultimately is going to be one thing that most other teams do not do, that can lead to the right internal leadership and the right culture that is required for the success that you're looking for. So I hope again that you took some good things away from this session, and we will see you again in another week or two for session number 5.